All right, welcome, everybody. Looks like we have about, I don't know what happened. Oh, people are rejoining, that's why. Okay, so it looks like we have, let's wait for the numbers to rise up. Second here. And I realize, I think when she starts the recording, I think it kicks everybody off and then people have to come back on. Okay, looks like the numbers have leveled out. Excellent. All right, welcome, everybody. This is our second webinar in our series called Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology. We did change the title a little bit to be a little bit more inclusive of all kinds of careers. So we're going with Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology. We are so happy to have each and every one of you joining us. I am your host, Aaron Stoller. I currently serve in the industrial sector as an applied ecologist for ExxonMobil Biomedical Sciences, and I also serve as the senior chair for ESA's public and private sector ecologist section. I've also served on ESA's membership committee. So the purpose of this webinar is to share stories, share guidance for all job seekers in the world of ecology. More than ever, there's an abundance of ecological careers available in government, industry, consulting, education, nonprofit organizations, all kinds of different places. And ecologists in these positions are really leading incredibly fulfilling careers that are helping to translate research into sustainable futures. These ecologists are also generating really novel research in collaboration with partners across sectors and in academia. I know that I am personally in my role, I get to do a lot of work with a lot of different partners, and it's really exciting. Unfortunately, and I do speak from mentoring experience because I was a college mentor for 5 years. College and university mentors are often not prepared or equipped to guide students along these career paths. And so this webinar series is here to help that. It's here to help job seekers in finding career opportunities, to broaden networks, and perhaps to provide, dare I say, a little bit of hope for those that are struggling to find their niche, and to help ESA cast a wider and more inclusive net over the professional ecological world. So with me today, I have two guests, including Thomas Fitzgibbons, who is an environmental scientist from RRP Consulting Engineers. And I have Kevin Janni, who is a natural resources service line leader from GHD Consultants. We're going to have a conversation with both of them in turn, no more than 20 minutes, probably only about 15 minutes. We're going to leave plenty of time for questions at the end. If you ask a question and need to leave before the end, no worries. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for your listening pleasure after its conclusion. Also, we will be compiling all of the questions. If there's any questions that go unanswered, we will have the speakers answer them after the webinar. And we will send them out to everybody at a later date. So you will get your question answered as long as it's kind and appropriate, please, nothing that is antagonistic. Also, if you feel like asking a question in private, please stay tuned for all our contact information at the end. You should definitely connect with all of us on LinkedIn and also send us emails. We are here for networking, right? That's how people get jobs, is by networking. And so while I don't think that anyone on the call today is advertising any jobs right now, I don't know that that's the case or not. They might be, but they definitely know of people that are. So always be networking. That's a really great way to enter the job market. So Thomas, we're going to go with you first. Instead of me fumbling over your introduction, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what your company does, and what your day-to-day role and responsibilities are.
All right. Well, like Aaron said, my name is Thomas Fitzgibbons. At RRP Consulting Engineers is a general engineering and consultant firm. We specialize in transportation and water projects mostly. And my role in the company is to make sure that those projects comply with all applicable environmental laws and regulations. So if our client is a local mobility authority and they want to build a new road in a certain location, my role would be to look at where that road is going and what laws and regulations would apply to it based on its location, the funding sources, other applicable criteria.
Okay. And so let's kind of frame that a little bit better for an audience that's not familiar with this industry. Who
Okay.
would be like your typical clients? Are we talking municipalities, governments?
Yeah, local governments are one of our major categories of clientele. We also do a lot of work with the Texas Department of Transportation, aka TxDOT.
Okay. So then you're based in Texas, is that correct then?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, excellent. So, thanks for that overview. So for our audience that is not necessarily familiar with the world of consulting, with the world of industry and whatnot, let's kind of go with this assumption that most people are in school and trying to figure out what their potential career path might be. I know that that's not the case for everybody, but let's just assume that that's the base case. With that in mind, can you share an idea of your career journey and really how you transitioned from academia to your current role? What kind of went through your mind? Were you always thinking that you were going to be working in this private sector? And I do see that somebody raised their hand. Feel free to put a question in the chat. We're not going to take questions while we're in conversation, but do put a question in the chat. So yeah, if you can just share that overview, that would be great.
Okay. Well, I never really transitioned from academia. I was never in academia. When I was studying my undergrad, my bachelor's degree at Texas Tech, my plan A was to work in national parks or state parks, or one of the other um, state authorities like Texas Parks and Wildlife, Colorado Department of Fish and Game, one of those. I sort of came into consulting by accident. When I was doing my job search, I was getting frustrated with uh, my results in trying to find a job in the parks or with one of the uh, parks and wildlife authorities. I actually got a job offer in Wyoming for my first consulting firm. This was a seasonal job. This company specialized in their clients were oil and gas companies. So these companies were drilling on Bureau of Land Management land. And this company helped them comply with BLM regulations for their lease. So mostly that means the short version of it is when you drill on BLM land, when you're finished with it, you have to put it back the way it was before. So this
Bro,
company helped
so
them.
just sorry to interject. For anybody that doesn't know what BLM is, we're talking Bureau of Land Management, because a
Yes.
lot of people might not be from out west or familiar with that. Go ahead.
Right. Right. So the Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, uh, well, the short version, like I said, is they want you to put the land back the way you found it. So what this company did was they seeded the disturbed areas, uh, monitored them for growth, promoted growth as well as they could. Sometimes that involves reseeding. Sometimes that means manually pulling up invasive plants, or in one case, we had to chemically apply some pesticides in order to remove some invasive plants. When I finished with that season, I got a job with another consulting firm down here in Houston. From there, I transitioned to another company called S&B, which was mostly engineering. They did transportation and water, as well as some oil and gas infrastructure. But most of my projects as an environmental scientist with S&B had to do with the transportation and water projects. So when S&B divested their transportation and water contracts in early June of 2023, the environmental department went with them. So that became a new company called RRP Consulting Engineers.
Okay.
So I've been helping guide these projects through the National Environmental Policy Act compliance process, compliance with the Clean Water Act. And that can involve writing reports which are submitted to regulatory authorities like Texas Parks and Wildlife, sometimes to the Texas Department of Transportation Environmental Affairs Division, and sometimes to the Army Corps of Engineers.
So your role, you started off wanting to be Parks and Recreation, or sorry,
Mhm.
Parks and Wildlife. Um, were you thinking that you were going to get into, um, working with policy much at the time, or was that something that you sort of fell into later?
That was something I fell into later as I started to grow into the consulting role.
Okay.
For the Parks Department, I didn't think I would be having anything to do with policy except for possibly enforcing it. But
Okay.
as a consultant, I need to keep aware of any major changes in policy, in regulation, in law.
So how has that transition been? Because for a lot of students that I talk to, they want to work outside, right? The
Mhm.
thought is that
Yeah.
you always want to be working outside. You
Oh,
want to
yeah.
be working with animals and plants and stuff. And then later on, a lot of the people that I'm talking with, they find themselves in these roles where they're reading and they're implementing things under policy. So it sounds like you have quite a bit of that you have to do every day is reading and interpreting policies. How do you feel about that, right? I mean, do you like that policy part of the job?
I'm fine with it, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, Now that I'm getting into my late 30s, I'm starting to become less enamored with some of the field work that we do. With working on transportation projects, the field work isn't actually that physically demanding because most of the roads have to be connected to other roads, and so uh, getting around the project site is usually pretty easy. My first consulting job here in Houston, most of our clientele with that company were actually oil and gas companies, and that involves a lot of cross-country pipeline rights of way or transmission line rights of way. And so that was a lot of hiking. That was a lot of climbing over barbed wire fences to get from one ranch to another. Um, Sometimes that was dodging construction sites or sites where um, things have been dumped.
To be clear, I don't think we're advocating going over a barbed wire fence for anybody, but if if that's what the job
Sometimes that's
needs,
sometimes that's just what you got to do in
yeah,
order to find where the species may be, where the wetlands might be.
yeah.
Um, it, so workplace safety is a major concern whenever we do any kind of field work.
So when you say that you were getting frustrated with finding jobs in parks and wildlife, was it the case, and answer this as you wish, was it the case that there were no job openings, that you found that you weren't qualified for the jobs, that you were getting rejected, or, can you speak a little bit to that?
I was getting rejected. One thing that I was not aware of at the time when I first started applying for jobs in, National Park Service, for example, is that the National Park Service, being a federal agency, does um, give hiring preference to veterans, and I was never in the military.
Okay.
So if they have two equally qualified candidates and one of them is a veteran, then my understanding is that they must select the veteran.
Is that strictly for enforcement roles?
No, that is for, I think, for any kind of federal job.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so across the board.
As far as I
Interesting.
understand, feel free to double check me to fact check me on that one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's for like all positions in there, but I can definitely see for some of them they might suggest veterans.
Yeah.
If there's anybody in the chat, if there's anybody online that has a better knowledge of that, please do.
Now, one thing they do for enforcement jobs, for law enforcement, park rangering, they do give preference to candidates who have worked in other law enforcement agencies.
Hmm.
So one possible career path would be to work in, for example, Houston Police Department or Denver Police Department, and then apply for a job as a law enforcement park ranger in Rocky Mountain, in Grand Canyon, or one of those other places.
So we'll get back to your current career in a second, but for the Parks and Rec jobs, would you have felt that a like some background in criminal justice, like criminal justice classes in college, might have helped your chances?
Yes. In
Yeah.
fact, Texas Tech, where I had my bachelor's degree, they actually do offer a major in conservation law enforcement.
Okay.
So you would study a bit of the science, you would study a bit of the wildlife law, and then you would also be studying uh, what law enforcement need to learn.
Okay. So that's very helpful for anybody who's thinking about kind of that career. I had many students that came to me, they wanted to be a park ranger, a park officer. And, a lot of times I did find that a criminal justice background helped in those
Yes.
job applications.
There
So,
is also,
oh,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry,
No?
but you can also find training programs that are specific to law enforcement
Okay.
in National Park Service and Forest Service, BLM, those agencies.
If there's anybody that's interested in that, would you feel that you might have some directionality, like helpful directions for them if they contacted you?
I don't think I could give any direction at this point because the seasonal training program that I did was many years ago. I
Okay.
don't know if is still being offered at that. It was offered at Northern Arizona University.
Okay.
It was seasonal and it did not lead to a job. So there's that to keep an eye out for. Actual experience in law enforcement is looked on more favorably than just the training program by itself.
Got it. That makes sense.
Mhm.
All right, so let's get to your current job. So, this is fascinating because when most of us drive, right? And
Yeah.
we don't think about what goes into planning a road, building a road, and sometimes deconstructing or renovating a road. They don't think about the policies that are surrounding by that, and it's actually a pretty fascinating field because it's so ubiquitous across our country.
Mhm.
Um, so, what what would you say your day-to-day requirements are? Like, give the audience kind of a picture for what you do in an average week.
In an average week, um, each project is unique, um, but I focus on NEPA compliance, National Environmental Policy Act. So most cases, the way I move those projects forward is by preparing the reports or the NEPA compliance document for each individual project. Um, so an environmental assessment is a NEPA document. That's considered the middle level of NEPA compliance. Um, advancing an EA project forward, it probably includes writing up that environmental assessments based on the results of our field investigations. So the section on threatened and endangered species, impacts to threatened and endangered species, the section on impacts to vegetation and wildlife habitat would be customized to express what we found out there on our field investigations, and based on that, what effects we think that building this road or expanding this road or realigning it would have on listed species that may occur in the area and their habitat.
Got it.
Um,
So, would you say that most of your week then is spent writing up reports?
yes,
I see.
yes.
Okay.
So it could be a NEPA document. It could also be a wetland delineation report. It could be a hazardous materials initial site assessment. There's such a thing called the phase one environmental site assessment. That one is not related to NEPA, but the kind of work that goes into it is usually a part of NEPA compliance. That's where you're looking for things that may release hazardous materials into the environment. And you would have to see if your project is going to affect any of the sites where those might occur
Okay.
or have been known to occur in the past.
Okay.
Other impacts that we look at are impacts to the community, because NEPA looks at both the natural environment and the human environment. So we're going to look at what building that road project would do to travel patterns, to community facilities like parks and museums and schools. Public involvement is also another part of NEPA compliance. And in fact, my coworkers and I are today getting ready to go to a public meeting near project site. So we're going to present a set of alternatives to the public, get their feedback, and see if we can find one alternative that the community favors that would meet the project's purpose and need.
How do you like that public engagement part of your job?
It's not my favorite part, if I'm honest. It can be It's very stressful to prepare for one of these because there's a lot that you need to do for a public involvement, for a public meeting. You need to make sure that you have displays, visual displays for people. Depending on the format of the public meeting, you might need to prepare a presentation. And then once you get to the meeting, it could be very, very busy. It could be a lot of things going on. The community might not want the project at all, and so you might be facing a hostile crowd. And sometimes hardly anyone shows up at all, and so you're there for 2-3 hours just waiting for someone to appear and ask you questions about the project.
So when you're talking about all of the stuff that you're doing on a day-to-day role, in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, you're not doing all of that. You're definitely hiring, or RRP has hired people to help you do some of these things, like prepare materials for meetings or do site investigations and
Mhm.
compile data. And so thinking about the audience that we have on here who are, let's assume that most of them are job seekers. What would you say for an undergraduate or for a master's student? What qualities, what classes, what are you looking for? What kinds of jobs would you generally be hiring for? And what are you looking for in those candidates?
That could depend a lot on the specific company. So, because we have a very small environmental team here at RRP, everyone on the environmental team has to be a generalist. Um, I
What does
have,
that mean? Yeah, tell us what you mean?
so think about generalist species and specialist species, they're niches. For a generalist like me, I have to be familiar with not only the Endangered Species Act and Migratory Bird Treaty Act as an ecologist, but I also have to keep abreast of all those other laws and regulations that apply to community impacts, to hazardous materials, to water, to air quality. So we have to be familiar with how all those things work. There are companies where the environmental staff is a lot more specialized, where, for example, you might just be doing waters of the US delineations. You'd be going out, you'd be delineating, you'd be coming back, processing that data, filling out the data forms, writing up the report, talking with the GIS team, Geographic
Okay.
Information Systems team, to make sure that the maps are accurate. So
Okay.
you might just be doing that, or you might just be doing species investigations, or you might just be doing hazardous materials investigations. So specialist roles do exist. Most of the job openings that I see, uh, I would say, are probably more in the generalist side, and it's probably helpful to be familiar with all those other different laws and regulations, not just the ecological side, but also hydrology, with water, with air, with hazardous materials, with community, because then you would be able to communicate with the rest of your team more effectively.
Are there any classes that you wish, given all of those generalist activities, are there any classes that you wish you would have taken that might have prepared you a little bit better for your current role?
That I wouldn't have taken, that wouldn't have prepared me,
No, that you would have taken.
would have taken,
That you would have taken.
that I would have wished that I would have taken. Um, Technical writing. I wish that if I could go back, I would probably replace one of the electives that I took as a bachelor's candidate, and replace one of the electives with some sort of technical writing, because that is a big part of what I do as a consultant.
I think you speak for almost every single consultant that I've talked with, is what
Mhm.
their most desirable feature is for job candidates is technical writing. If they can't communicate and they can't write, they're not
Mhm.
gonna make it. So yeah, I think Kevin can correct me if he's wrong, but I'm seeing his head nod. So
Oh,
I think that
yeah.
people want that.
There's also the environmental law classes that I took were focused on ecology. So one was wildlife law, for example. If I could have taken a class specifically for NEPA, that probably would have been a really great addition to my curriculum, because NEPA connects with so many other federal laws, and
Yeah,
many states have equivalent laws to NEPA. California, I know, has one. So does Hawaii.
yeah. Yeah, so that is another great thing. If you're not taking an environmental economics or an environmental law class, something that gets you engaged outside of environmental
Mhm.
science and ecology, and more towards the policy side, I strongly recommend that as well. I personally wish, I don't know if I'm ever going to do one of these things where I'm on the other side of the interviewer, but I personally wish that I was taking a lot more environmental law classes when I was in college. I didn't take anything. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to switch to the ESA for a few announcements, and then we'll go to Kevin here. I love this question. What is your most proudest accomplishment in your career to date?
I found a way to accelerate the permitting for a project without compromising any environmental integrity.
Now that may not
So
sound like much to people who are not doing permitting, but that is a really great achievement.
yeah, this was, I think it was something like a 14-mile roadway project. TxDOT was planning to expand a roadway from 2 lanes to 4. And they knew they were going to have to do this at some point as soon as they built this road way back in the 90s, because the right of way for it, the area that is cleared for that roadway, was twice as wide as it needed to be.
Mm,
So you had your 2 lanes in the right of way, and then there was another half of the right of way to the north side of it that was regularly mowed and maintained, because they knew that one day in the future, this was connecting 2 different major highways. So they knew that at some point that was going to have to go to 4 lanes. So what I did on that project was I looked at where the wetlands were, and I looked at where the watersheds were. And what I noticed was that the sub-watershed boundaries, so the U.S. Geological Survey, they separate watersheds into nested sub-watersheds, from basins to watersheds to sub-watersheds, and they have hydrologic unit codes, but longer numbers for these hydrologic unit codes for the smaller units. And I noticed that the boundaries of sub-watersheds for this highway coincided very closely with roadway intersections. So what we talked with TxDOT, and what TxDOT did was they separated this project into several smaller projects, each one with its own internal identification job code that TxDOT uses. And so instead of submitting one very large individual permit for the entire 14-mile project, we submitted a series of nationwide permits. These are much smaller DLs. They can be prepared much more quickly, and they are processed much more quickly. They can be processed in a matter of months where an individual permit takes possibly a year.
mhm.
So for each segment, we submitted a nationwide permit application. We took care of the mitigation for impacts to the wetlands in that area. And um, that way the project could get approved in pieces, and construction could start in each segment much more quickly than we could have if we tried to prepare one individual permit for the entire project.
Got it. So, for those of you that are not familiar with permitting, any project that you do
Hmm.
really needs a host of different permits. The more complicated the project, the more permits you generally need, and a lot of people will hire other people to do the permits, but they can take a very long time. And so, if you find the world of permitting interesting, then that's great. That you are going to do a great job. If you don't happen to find it interesting, I do actually strongly recommend that you take some class where you learn a little bit about environmental permitting, because that is really useful to know like exactly what you're going to have to face later on. Yeah. Um, all right. Well, Thomas, thank you so much. If you can just glance at the questions while we're talking with If you have to go, you have to go. But if you can glance at the questions, I think Kevin has been answering some of them, and I believe Sandra on the other end has been answering some of them as well. But if you care to add
Okay.
anything, please go for it. Sandra, would you like to do a quick announcement for some ESA stuff?
Thanks, Aaron. And don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be back. I just want to give some a few quick announcements from ESA. Mark the dates because these are the upcoming sessions of these webinar series. We have the third webinar on November 7th and then the fourth webinar on December 5th. All of these will be recorded, and I will be sharing all the links in the chat soon. It's just like tricky moving all these at once. I'm sharing. And I also want to share, we do have other opportunities through ESA's professional development program. We have several webinars lined up as part of the Science Communication in the Parks, or SKIP program, which is sponsored in part by the National Park Service. These events are open to anyone interested, and registration is available for all. And here are the upcoming sessions. We have one tomorrow on storytelling in science. We have another one on introduction to accessible digital communications, and then lean on laughter, strategies for humor in science communication. And we also have a building science communication toolkit to center indigenous perspectives. And so those will be happening this month and next month, November. I also want to mention ESA's Professional Ecology Certification Program. For those who might not know, ESA has a Professional Ecology Certification program. A couple of quick facts. It's been around for over 40 years, and you do not have to be an ESA member to get certified. You can learn more about this program at esa.org/certification or email cert@esa.org with any questions. I also want to mention the call for proposals is now open for the ESA 2025 annual meeting taking place from August 10th through the 15th in Baltimore, Maryland. This year's theme is Ecology is Everywhere, and we invite you to submit your proposals for symposia or organize oral sessions and inspire sessions. And the deadline to submit these proposals is November 14th. The nominations for the ESA awards are fellows and early career fellows are open. This is a great opportunity to celebrate your mentors, colleagues, peers, and the deadline for this is November 7. And applications are also open for the Excellence in Ecology or EEE scholarships, and the deadline for that is October 28th. And again, I will be sharing all the relevant links in the chat in just one moment. And thank you for your attention, and I'll hand it back to you, Aaron.
Great. Thank you, Sandra. There's a couple of questions I think that you could answer in the chat that came up while you were talking. Do keep those questions coming. Somebody asked about it being recorded. This session is being recorded. It will be posted on YouTube afterwards. Yeah, we really love all of these questions. It's really great. I will throw a personal pitch in there for ESA. I am not paid by the organization, and I don't have any skin in that game, but I really do. If you've never been to a conference before and you really want to check it out, if you've never been to a professional conference before, ESA is a really great one to go to. It's really friendly. It's really inclusive. It's extremely diverse. They have sessions for everybody. There's so many mixers. There's so many opportunities to get engaged. There's, you know, they always choose a great place. This year is in Long Beach. Next year it's in Baltimore. I'm from Baltimore, so I'm not really sure if I can say it's a great place or not, but I think it's okay. It really is a pretty neat conference to go to. It was the first one that I ever went to. I went to it as an undergraduate, and it really convinced me that I wanted to be an ecologist. So Sandra, you heard it there first. You can hold me accountable to that statement later on. All right, Kevin. So same introduction for you. If you can introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you're currently working. I should have been a little bit more clear, not when I said a transition from academia, not that you were a professor or anything, but when you were in school, how did you decide to get from school to your current career? What was that trajectory like?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Aaron. So Kevin Janni, I work for GHD, which is a global consulting firm, not dissimilar from Thomas's company. We do environmental consulting, architecture, engineering, construction, advisory, and digital services. I've been a consultant, environmental consultant, for nearly 17 years, which I still have trouble wrapping my head around. And so as far as, kind of my trajectory into private sector ecology, when I started my master's degree, when I started in my master's program, on day one, it was always my intent that I would finish my master's degree and do a PhD. And it just kind of happened, kind of maybe a multitude of reasons. But when I finished up my master's degree, I just knew that I didn't want to do a PhD. I just didn't see the academic side of things being totally fulfilling to me, like long term. And also, I think I was a little burned out at the end of my master's degree. And so I did, I think what a lot of us end up doing is I graduated and I moved home with my parents. And basically, I just needed a job. So I had my master's degree is in botany. And I was just searching job boards for openings where they wanted somebody with a botany degree. And I'll be honest with you, when I took my first job, I don't think I even really knew what environmental consulting was. It was, I interviewed with the company and they had these projects and, they wanted to know, my ecological background, but then also my ability to identify habitats for different endangered species. And it just sounded cool. And I just needed a job. And luckily, it's worked out really well for me. I enjoy the challenges of environmental consulting and have stuck with it clearly for a long time.
So I think that you probably made a lot of the audience feel really comfortable there when you were like, and then I moved in with my parents and I got burnt out. I think that a lot of people are in school and they feel these feelings, and I think a lot of them probably feel as though they're failing for some reason. And burnout is something that a lot of us feel. The scary career job market is also something a lot of us feel. But the sense that I get from consulting is really that it's a wonderful career. You can have fulfilling career, and you can have a family if that's something that you want, with kind of a structured time that you're working. So I just thought I'd add that. Thank you for that introduction. So let's talk a little bit about GHD. So remind me what you got your master's in. What was your focus of your master's?
Well, I mean, my thesis was an ecological project, but my master's is in botany.
Okay, that's right. So botany. So right now in your current role, are you using that master's experience?
Yeah, I mean, in different ways, and yes, differently over time. So when I first started my first consulting job, I went through the onboarding process and signed up for all my benefits and all that. And I went into my boss's office and he said, "Okay, so you're going to be a wetland scientist now."
Yeah.
And I was just like, cool. Like I haven't done that before, but I'm an ecologist and I can do that. I can take that on. And my master's degree, I think that I benefited from the program I was in being very strong on public speaking and communications. I found that to be really valuable to me as a consultant. So that's not just communicating with your coworkers, but also your clients and also to the regulatory agencies. And then, I mean, let's just wave the flag of technical writing too. There is a difference between scientific writing and technical writing, but it's a subtle nuance. And so I think that I had a pretty strong writing skill set that was less challenging for me to adapt into technical writing than I saw from maybe some of my peers that didn't have that background. And then, as it happens, typically for a lot of us, as we progress, or should I say get older, you end up doing less field work and more of maybe the project management or otherwise technical side of in office. I always come back to the skills that I picked up in graduate school around critical thinking is really what's helped me from day one to 16 years later.
I'll second that. That's a really great point that you bring up. So a lot of students that I talk to, they get frustrated after their master's degree because they're not finding jobs, or they're unsure about what it is that they are in that program for. And I think it's important to remember that the topic of your master's degree is not the most important part. It's the skills that you learn while you're getting your master's. That's really important. And that's true for PhD as well. Although with PhDs, it is a little bit more important, the research that you're doing that sort of guides you into your area of specialty. But that critical thinking part is really important. And, I'm going to go off my question script here because you mentioned critical thinking. I'd love to chat about that a second. How could students or any job seeker demonstrate to potential employers that they have critical thinking skills that would be very valuable? And I know this is a deviation, so if you don't have an immediate answer for it, please say pass, and it's fine.
Well, I'll say pass with a caveat. I think that what you would want to demonstrate probably might be hard to convey on a resume or a CV, but in a job interview would be how you found a solution to a problem or overcame some kind of challenge. I think that's kind of the short on the spot response I can give to that one. Because those are the situations where we rely on our critical thinking abilities. So that's definitely, I think, where the opportunity is to show that to a prospective employer.
So thinking about prospective employers and interviews, in addition to, and we should really talk just a little bit more about your day-to-day at GHD so people get a full sense of that too. And so I'll get back to that in just a second. But thinking about interviews and what you look for in candidates, I know GHD employs a wide range of people as well. I've talked with you previously about economics as well as environmental stuff, permitting, lots of different things. In general, what is some important classes that you look for in students, or what's some important classes that you wish that you would have had coming in that would have made you the better candidate for your position?
I don't know. It varies on the candidate. Some candidates have bachelor's degrees, some have master's or higher. I don't know that there's any specific course. I guess I would say for somebody with a master's degree, I would want to see some more specialized courses versus just environmental studies or environmental resource management, which is, really kind of a course that's very high level, covers a whole lot of different topics, not too in depth over a semester. So I'm not devaluing the knowledge that anyone can get from that, but I do like to see somebody with maybe more of a specialized course, knowing that they have drilled down into the gory details on a topic. As far as classes that I wish I would have taken, and I guess I'm going to show my age here, and I should also caveat this with, I'm probably not the best example because I did my master's degree at the University of Hawaii. So when one of our professors got funding for a GIS lab, and somebody offered us, just for our students, not a formal class, but some workshops to learn about it. I was just like, why would I do? I'm going surfing, guys. You know, you enjoy that. So when I became a consultant, I realized that that was a terrible oversight on my part. And, certainly wish I had learned more about GIS. And I think that today it's a little bit more common that students, even at the undergraduate level, are getting that education around GIS.
Yeah, I'll definitely second that. GIS is one of those skills, and I was on that transition too, where we had a GIS major, but I didn't take it, and I really, really, really wish I did, because I had to self-teach myself everything later on. It's not that you can't learn it later on, but employers are going to have to invest in your classes later on, and if they don't have to, that's a big plus. And I will say, it's okay that you went surfing. You're supposed to have fun in the short life that we have. It's okay. And I'll also speak to something you said, those specialized courses that you kind of look for in people. It's not that the specialized courses necessarily are something that you're going to use on the job, but taking a course in something that's specialized shows that you can specialize in something. And that's oftentimes what a lot of employers are looking for. So in the short time that we have left, I do want to just talk a little bit about GHD and what you are responsible for in the job role that you have.
Okay, sure. I wear a few different hats at GHD. And I think that kind of at my core, I am a project manager. So, clients will come to GHD with a project, oftentimes some kind of a development project, and they say, hey, this is what we want to build. We need to get permit authorization from state, municipal, federal levels, so we can construct our project and get us there from point A to B. So, that's pre-construction field surveys, et cetera, a lot of the same stuff that Thomas was talking about. And then also at GHD, I serve all of the technical services at GHD, such as site remediation or environmental health and safety, or for me, natural resources. We call those service lines. And so I serve as our service line leader for North America. So that's US and Canada. And in that role, it's something new and different every day. A lot of times I'm connecting folks across regions. Somebody wants to know, do we have somebody who can do California red-legged frog surveys? I can send them to that person. And then sometimes it comes on from the client side on a proposal that might be an opportunity for us to get a multi-region or multi-statewide project, and we need to demonstrate our technical aptitude, experience, our professionals who will be on that project, develop a proposal, develop the cost estimate for it, etc. So I work on that side of things often as well. And then just, kind of ensuring that what we're doing at GHD from the technical side across all of our regions is done at the highest quality standard that serves us, our clients, the communities where we live and work. So, that's everything from keeping up with the ever-changing regulations, keeping up with technological advances, finding innovative approaches to things, and staying ahead of the curve as different opportunities become more in vogue. Stuff around nature-based solutions, for example, or biodiversity, ever increasing in popularity and interest amongst our clients. And we have to be positioned to be like, oh yeah, we know all about that. And we do, but sometimes we haven't synthesized it all together. So that's something else that I try to do as the service line leader.
So I just want to draw on something you said, you try to deliver the highest quality, and consulting often gets a bad rap, and I think I understand sort of why it gets a bad rap in college classes. Professors are not necessarily familiar with it, but I think one of the thoughts is that you're just serving businesses, but the reality is that consultants often are that thin line between businesses and sustainability. And it's sort of like they're the gatekeepers for making sure that businesses really do follow the rules as best as science tells us to. And so you have to keep abreast with science as well as policy and interface those with businesses. And I also want to point out before we jump to some Q&A here, I also want to point out a lot of people do think that consultants spend all of their time behind a desk. And I have to say, I've ran into Kevin in more states than I think I've worked. I think I just keep on running into him at meetings, and I didn't know that he's going to be there. So like we were just talking about another meeting coming up and what meetings we're going to be at. I think that, I don't know if this is true for you, Thomas, but consultants, they get to travel quite a bit, right? Touring around different states, within states. And if that's what you're interested in, it's a great career. Thomas, you look like you're about to say something.
Travel is a big part of the job. At
Yeah.
RRP, we have, I'm based in Houston, but a lot of our clients are local governments on the border. So we have clients in Brownsville, which is one of the border communities. I've done projects for LaSalle County over in Central Texas. I've done projects for waste management. They were one of our clients on a few projects, and for those we went to Northeast Texas. We have another long-term project we're doing for them in Central Texas. I will say the right company makes all the difference. My first consulting company that I worked with in Houston, this should have been my first red flag for them. They did not always give me a lot of warning when I would be going out of town for an extended period for an overnight trip. One time I got a text message at 2 a.m. telling me that I was going on a multi-day trip that very same morning, just a few hours. I did not get that text message. I never apologized for not getting that text message. But the company I'm working for now, at S&B and then at RRP, we got a lot more warning before we went into the field. So we were told often weeks in advance, this is when we're going to be going out in the field. And so that was a lot more helpful for me. And now that I am really in a next man up situation because of the departure of our environmental manager, I get to have a lot more leeway and have a lot more say in when I go out into the field and for how long.
Yeah, so that is an important point that like when you first start off, you're sort of at the whim of what the employer really wants you to do. And then as you progress forward and you start a family, or if you don't start a family and you just want to sort of stay in one place, you can guide what you do. If you want to keep on traveling, you can keep on traveling until you retire. But if you would rather be in one place, a lot of businesses will respect that life change. I'm looking through these questions, and both of you have done a stellar job in answering questions as they're coming in, and I don't see a whole lot of new questions. We will send out, I think we're trying to start a blog too, where we post answers to a lot of these questions. I do want to just, so somebody did ask a question about how changes in administration might affect things. And somebody asked that question on the last webinar too. And I am not going to pose that one to the members live. I don't want to get into politics, but I do want to ask something related. People always complain about the job market. No matter what age I have mentored, and no matter what time period, it always seems as though no one's finding a job. Or if they are, they're just very lucky. We're moving through interesting periods of time, but they're no more interesting than previous periods. But what is your sense for the job market moving forward, at least in the field of consulting? Kevin, I'll go to you first.
You know, always be a demand for smart and talented people. I mean, it's very difficult for somebody who is smart and talented to remain unemployed for very long. What's really exciting in the consulting field is, what the bulk of my career has been around permitting a development project. And the last 5, 6, 7 years, more and more clients are coming to us with straight biodiversity conservation projects, ecological uplift projects, nature-based solutions. And it's been a big deal for me personally because it takes me back to like, oh, well, I mean, this is what I went to school for. This is what I want to do. I get to apply all of my scientific background, knowledge, etc., to just doing straight, pure conservation or enhancement projects. And the fact that that is getting more traction really globally, but even I guess I would say right now I'm seeing a lot of it just in the United States and Canada is really heartening. And I find it an exciting time for ecologists who might be interested in the consulting side of things.
That's great to hear. That really is great. I'm glad you mentioned like Canada as well, because if you're not finding a job right in the US, look elsewhere as well. There's environmental policies everywhere. Sandra, before I jump to you, Thomas, Sandra, can you please load the contact QR codes for everybody? Like I said in the very beginning, this is really a chance for you to network with people. Please follow all of us on LinkedIn. We're happy to check out with you. We're happy to communicate with you. Thomas, what's your sense for the job market?
I do think it's going to grow. If you recall the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed, that released a lot of federal funding for new construction projects. And anytime a project is federally funded, it must comply with NEPA, with the National Environmental Policy Act. So federal involvement is the trigger for NEPA. So by releasing all that funding for all these new projects, that is going, I think, to increase the demand for people with familiarity with the NEPA process. So
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and so we may already be seeing a bit of a shortage of NEPA specialists in the job market. So if you can find yourself a course on that and see how the process works, that could really give you a leg up. And
Yeah.
very few employers, I think, are looking for entry level, but sometimes you have to take what you can get. But that's a situation that we found ourselves at RP. We wanted someone with several years of experience bringing in NEPA projects, but they weren't out there. Whoever was out there was already happy where they were. So we took an entry-level candidate who looked promising.
So I'll say two comments to that. One is, it is sometimes difficult to come across an entry-level position, but if you are struggling to find an entry-level position in something that you particularly want, find an entry-level position in something that you don't want and transform it, right? So do the job that you're hired to do, absolutely. And then see if there's any opportunities in that job to do a little bit of what you do want to do. And you know what? You're not married to a job, right? No one is thinking that you're going to last in a job forever, and you can always transition to a job such as the one you're talking about where you need a little bit more experience. And the second thing I want to mention is, just related to this question of how the coming potential change in administration is. And again, I'm not going to get into politics. There is always going to be a need for people to interpret policy shifts in the industry. And there's always going to be policy shifts. So I wouldn't think that there's ever going to be a shortage of that demand. But like Thomas, like you said, there might be differences in where people are hiring, whether it's entry level or more senior level. So we're going to end here pretty soon. There is one more question I kind of liked, and this is from, I think it's Nicole. If you have been out of the field for a little bit, and you're looking to get back into it. You know, I just had a student actually contact me, and they said, you know, they took some time off, they started a family, and now they're looking to get back into it. And they were concerned that they're not going to be able to do it because they just don't have the experience that you need. What's your advice for that kind of person? Thomas, you go.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just scrolling back up to that
Oh,
question.
and Sandra, if you could put on the next slide too while he's talking. These are our future webinars. Thomas, please.
Yes. Okay. Someone who's been out of work for a little while wants to get back into it. That is a very difficult question to answer because a lot of a company's human resources departments simply will not look at someone who is not currently employed.
Okay.
Smaller companies where there aren't those barriers between the different departments of the companies might probably, I would say, more willing to look at that, or you're more likely to be seen by them because your resume isn't just being reviewed just by human resources. They're also being more likely to be reviewed by the hiring manager themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not fair. I don't like it at all. I don't like it one bit, but that is how the hiring practices are currently.
Okay.
That's just the dominant trend.
So we're a little over time, and I know that ESA needs to get the platform back, but Sandra's not yelling at me. So Kevin, do you have a different answer or the same?
You know, I'll be honest with you. I was answering a question and then trying to find this question. What's the core?
So for somebody that doesn't have an opportunity, that has taken some time off from the field and is not currently employed, Thomas had indicated that it's going to be difficult because HR typically looks for people that are currently employed.
Right. So, you know, I think that this is where you have to be a little strategic or creative. There's no reason why everything, I know it's typical and standard, but not everything has to go through a corporate recruiter. You can make these connections with hiring managers or potential hiring managers through multiple ways: networking at ESA conferences, other kind of professional societies, LinkedIn, etc., and find your entry point that way. That way, you also have the advantage of it being looked through at the lens of someone like myself or Thomas, who might not look at it the same way as a talent acquisition specialist or HR, et cetera. Now, when you do that, it does ultimately, you know, it is to your advantage, but then it does kind of go back into the system. But that's where, you know, someone like myself or others might be like, no, this is a serious candidate. We want to do a formal interview with them. Let's make it happen.
Cool. Kevin, thank you so much for that. Sandra is yelling at me now. So thank you all so much for attending. And I will send you guys questions. Everyone that's been on, I'll send questions afterwards and responses. Wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll be on again next month. Pleasure.
Thanks, Aaron.